Welcome to the Dragon Soul Breakdown series. These breakdowns will give you a detailed insight into the Dragon Soul 10-man heroic encounters. In this video, I'll break down the Madness of Deathwing fight so that you have the tools to get the fight done. During the guide, I'm going to cover the entire fight mechanically, as well as giving you a recipe for how to finish the encounter in its entirety. This fight consists of two phases. The first phase will have you moving between 4 platforms and dealing with adds on each platform, with the strategy depending on which order you do them in. The second phase is a mix of ad management and finishing off Deathwing to conclude the tier. In terms of composition, you can use either 1 or 2 tanks, but for new groups I would strongly recommend using 2. You should use 3 healers as the damage output is very high, and you should fill the remaining spots with 5 DPS. Looking at the arena of the fight, you'll have 4 platforms which you'll sequentially move between and kill the limbs of Deathwing during phase 1. Each platform has 1 wing or arm connected to it, and once all 4 limbs are dead, phase 2 will begin where Deathwing's head will drop down and you can finish the boss. The common denominator for each platform will be the 5 ad type spawn, which needs to be dealt with in a similar way for all platforms. However, you'll be aided by the aspects and buff associated with each platform, which will help you in dealing with the mechanics. You'll start the fight with all 4 buffs activated, and for each platform you complete, the corresponding buff to the platform will be removed, making the encounter harder as you progress through the platforms in phase 1. Let's start off by taking a look at the ad types before going through the sequence of each platform. The first ad type is called Mutated Corruption. This ad will spawn at the back of the platform a short while after arriving and should redirect your entire group towards killing it before anything else. The ad itself has 2 notable mechanics. The first mechanic is called Impale and will be cast once or twice per platform depending on how high your DPS is. Once cast, the corruption locks onto its primary target and casts Impale after a few seconds. Once the cast is finished, he'll deal very high damage to the target and apply a debuff for 45 seconds. The debuff will cause any following impales to deal double damage, and in order to survive this ability, you'll need to have active mitigation of approximately 50% or you'll be one-shot. This mechanic alone will force you to cycle big cooldowns to survive, but it can be cheesed to some extent to negate the damage. If you do not have any big CDs available, your Shadow Priest can walk up into melee range while everyone else moves out of melee range so that the impale will be cast on the Shadow Priest. Once the cast is started, the Shadow Priest can disperse to survive the damage, but you can still take melee hits, so the timing is crucial. There are also other methods to deal with this by using deterrence or bop or even invisibility for your mages, but this will require very accurate coordination and I would not recommend using this strat if you don't have to. The second mechanic is called Crush. The Mutated Corruption will use Crush approximately every 8 seconds, where it's going to slam the ground in the direction of one of 2 specific players. Any targets in the impact zone will take heavy damage, and cheesing this mechanic is highly advised to keep your raid stable. Long story short, the corruption will always target one of the 2 players which are the oldest, meaning the characters which were created the longest time ago. I would highly suggest all groups to get a weak aura, which lets you plan for this mechanic in advance. Once the 2 oldest characters have been identified, they simply stand to the side of the raid so that only they will be hit by the crush and the other 8 raid members can safely ignore this mechanic. The second ad type is called Corrupting Parasite. This will be spawned twice per platform and is a fairly straightforward mechanic. A random player will be infested with a parasite which causes them to take moderate ticking damage for 10 seconds. At the end of the duration, the player will drop the parasite at their current location and it's going to explode in a 10-yard radius, dealing very high damage to anyone close to it. Once it's dropped, it starts a 10-second channel, and if this cast goes off, it's going to deal the equivalent of its remaining HP as damage to the raid, so you should prioritize killing this ad when it's up. There are 2 ways of dealing with this. Either you're going to drop it near your other priority targets and just cleave it down, or you're going to drop it in a safe location and make it your priority target. Both of these approaches have benefits which will be covered in the encounter walkthrough. The third ad type is called Elementium Bolt. This bolt is fired from Deathwing's head towards an indicated position on the platform. Once it lands on the location, it deals very high proximity based damage as the initial hit and pulses raid-wide damage on short intervals. Simply, you should prioritize killing this whenever it's up and you should be fine. The fourth ad type is called Blistering Tentacles. These 6 adds spawn on top of the arm or wing tentacles twice per platform, when the arm or wing is at 70% or 40% remaining HP. They apply a stacking debuff called Blistering Heat at a rapid pace, where each stack deals low fire damage, so dealing with these quickly is a priority to minimize the raid damage taken. An important note on these adds is that they're immune to AoE attacks, so you need to single target them down, but since they're very low HP, it should be a quick task for your group. The final add type is called Regenerative Blood. They have a time to spawn, which is just before the second parasite spawn, and it will spawn a total of 6 bloods, which have approximately 1.3 million HP each. These bloods apply a stacking dot with their melee hits, which deals low damage to the tank, so killing these early on is preferable. Every second, the bloods gain 10 energy, and once they reach 100 energy, they regain full HP. You need to allocate a planned burst window where you prioritize these adds to make sure that they all drop before regenerating their HP. A good way of dealing with these is to pick them up with the tank and then either killing them on the reset before the second parasite is spawned, or cleaving them down with the parasite once it's spawned. Apart from all the adds, the wing or arm tentacles will deal ramping raid-wide damage, which is increased proportionately to how low HP the tentacle is. Towards the end of a platform, this mechanic will deal moderate ticking damage to the raid. Before we dive into the walkthrough, let's have a quick rundown of the aspect buffs which are assigned to your raid during the encounter. Looking at the arena, each of the platforms correspond to an aspect which will give you a unique buff. Ysera's buff will give you an extra action button which can be used every so often, and once used, it will reduce your damage taken by 50% for a few seconds. Nosdormu's buff places a yellow time zone on the ground, which will slow down the efficiency of any adds while inside the zone. Directly translated, this reduces the application speed of debuffs from bloods, travel speed of the Elementum Bolt, and prolongs the cast time of the parasites by 50%. Using this to your advantage will help you in getting a clean kill, but it's definitely not necessary. Alexstrasza's buff will help you in killing the blistering tentacles and parasites. Once these adds spawn, Alexstrasza deals lethal damage over 5 seconds to the add types, as well as reducing the blood damage by a hefty amount. Consider this as a passive benefit, and it will be nothing you need to worry about. The final buff is from Calicos, which gives you a plus 20% damage increase and causes your abilities and attacks to sometime cause Spellweave. Spellweave is an AoE procced effect which deals around 20k damage to any targets near the unit which procs the ability. This mechanic lets you deal very high AoE damage in short time spans and should dictate some of your add positioning where AoE spells on all classes become king, since the proc does a very high amount of DPS. So when we start the encounter, you'll have all these buffs activated, but once a wing or arm tentacle is killed on a platform, Deathwing will remove one of the buffs from your raid corresponding to which platform you were on. This in itself will affect the sequence in which you do the platforms so that you optimize the usage of your buffs to help you get through the raid, but in general, I would recommend doing the platforms in the following order. You should start off on Ysera's platform, then you should go to Alexstrasza's platform, then Nosdormu's platform, and finally to Calicos's. Let's dive into the walkthrough of Phase 1 and see how all of this comes together. So, you're going to start off the fight on Ysera's platform. You lower the tentacle slightly until the first corruption spawns in the back of the room. As this spawns, you're going to get your first parasite, and I would recommend either dropping the parasite near the corruption to cleave it down, or inside the time zone to prolong the cast of the parasite. Make sure that your crush baiters are standing to the side so that the raid does not get affected. Your tanks will take impale hits by using the ability gained from Ysera called Dream, and you can swap between casts of impale. Shortly after the first impale, the Elementium Bolt will spawn, which will be slowed by the time zone. Everyone should quickly get it down before finishing off the corruption. Swap tanks and have your initial tank pick up the bloods as soon as they spawn. You can either hold them inside the time zone and kill them after the corruption is dead, or you can wait for the second parasite to spawn to cleave everything down, continue blasting the tentacle while letting Alexstrasza's buff clean up the blistering tentacles. You should remember to use your extra action button to use Dream when the tentacles are up to reduce the damage taken. Next, you should move to the far west to Alexstrasza's platform and repeat the pattern. On this platform, nothing will change from the first platform except the absence of the Dream ability from Ysera, so tanks should roll IBF, SI, or Shield Wall to survive the impales. Clean up the adds and continue to Nosdormu's platform. On Nosdormu's platform, you'll deal with the mechanics in the same way as the two first platforms, but since you no longer have Alexstrasza's buff, you'll need to manually kill the blistering tentacles and also put more DPS into the parasite once it's spawned. Make sure to pause your DPS at around 85% HP of the arm tentacle so that you do not overlap any mechanics with each other and do not hit the tentacles beyond this point until the corruption is dead. For the impales, you'll not have any big personal CDs, so using externals such as pain suppression and others will be instrumental to surviving this part. Alternatively, you can use Frenzied Regen, Vamp Blood, Rallying Cry, Barrier, Devotion Aura Mastery, or cheesing it with a DPS to get through the impales on this specific platform. Once the blistering tentacles spawn, make sure that you prioritize them with single target and that other adds are not alive at the time to minimize damage taken. Next, you'll move to the final platform of the Far East. Here, I would recommend using Bloodlust when the corruption spawns to lower it as soon as possible and try to kill it before the Elementium Bolt spawns. Since you do not have a time zone from Nosdormu on this platform, your damage taken will be substantially higher than on the other platforms. Once the Elementium Bolt goes in, it almost instantly lands on the ground, dealing massive amounts of damage, and I would stack up the entire group and using all raid cooldowns to survive this part. If the corruption is still alive, your Crush Baiters should remain outside of the stack to avoid overlaps and damage. And after the bolt is dealt with, you can safely return to kill the tentacle and proceed to Phase 2. Phase 2 is going to be initiated once the fourth limb is dead, and you'll be on Ysera's platform for this phase, and you'll regain all the aspect buffs. Phase 2 is going to have all new mechanics and also sees the introduction of 3 new add types which needs to be dealt with. In general, you need to understand that there are 3 breakpoints during this phase, at 15, 10, and 5% HP remaining of Deathwing. When these thresholds are met, Deathwing is going to spawn congealing bloods at a random location of the platform. These bloods will move towards his head and heal him for 1% for each blood you let through. These bloods are susceptible to slows, so using Hunter Traps or Rogues with Fan of Knives and Crippling Poison is almost a must. Additionally, the passive raid-wide damage from corrupted blood ramps up at these thresholds, so you should carefully choose when to push beyond the thresholds and when to hold back your DPS. Apart from the passive mechanics, Deathwing spawns 2 new adds which are spawned in sequence every 90 seconds. The first add type that spawns is called Elementium Fragments. They spawn in packs of 3 and have 1.7 mil HP each. They sequentially cast Shrapnel at a random target every 7 seconds, which will deal very high damage to the target. You should ensure that the targets use their extra action button to activate Dream before taking these hits. Shortly after the fragments are dead, 2 Elementium Terrors will spawn. 1 each should be picked up by the tanks and placed inside the time zone. They place a stacking dot on the tanks called Tetanus, which deals very high damage, so using defensives is going to be required. I would recommend saving your IBF, SI, or Shield Wall for the second set of these adds and pushing through the first set with the smaller CDs and the use of Dream. While all of this is happening, I would recommend that you bring down Deathwing to approximately 16% HP so that you do not cross the 15% HP threshold until the first set of adds are dealt with. Once they're dealt with, you have a window of approximately 1 minute before they spawn again, in which you can push the boss below both the 15 and 10% HP threshold while dealing with the congealing bloods twice. Then, you should deal with the fragments and terrors one more time while rolling big CDs before pushing the boss down below 5% HP and finishing the fight. The damage taken at lower percentages is going to be very high, so using all defensive cooldowns during this portion is somewhat of a must. And that's going to wrap up the Madness of Deathwing 10-man heroic guide. I want to sincerely thank you all for your continued support during the last couple of months. Going forward, I'm going to prioritize some additional material for Dragon Soul to ensure that you have all the material needed to get through the tier before we see the start of MOP. I'm planning to create a lot of MOP content throughout spring and summer, so ensure that you subscribe to the channel to keep yourself up to date on all the latest and greatest. I hope y'all enjoyed the video, and if you did, please leave a like. See y'all next time.